Snow fell lightly over the barracks that night, the kind of cold silence only an Alaskan winter could bring. Inside the perimeter of Fort Wainwright, rows of soldiers lay asleep in their bunks, their boots lined neatly at the edge of the floor. But at 2:30 a.m., one bed stood empty. A 22-year-old soldier vanished in the middle of the night. His boots and cap were still at his bunk. The military dogs tracked his scent until it stopped, suddenly, right at the main gate. If someone picked him up, who was it? And why has no one dared to speak for decades? The missing soldier's name was Private Aaron Young, 22 years old, raised in rural Montana, the kind of son every parent prayed for, hard-working, humble, loyal. He had grown up on farmland with his mother Linda, who proudly watched him leave for the Army with dreams of becoming an EMT after his service. To his fellow soldiers, Aaron was quiet, almost reserved. He laughed sometimes, but he was never the loudest voice in the room. That silence, they would later recall, made the night of his disappearance even harder to understand. February in Fairbanks was brutal. Daylight lasted only a few hours, and temperatures could sink to 20 below zero. Yet on the day before Aaron vanished, nothing seemed unusual. He woke at Reveille, washed up, and joined the rest of his unit for a quiet breakfast. They trained, did weapons checks, and even stood guard along the snowy perimeter fence. According to Sergeant Elena Ruiz, who supervised that patrol, it was routine. He wasn't acting strange, at least not then. The only thing I noticed were some odd footprints near the north fence. Hard to tell if they were fresh or old, but they didn't sit right with me. Later, Specialist Josh Parker, Aaron's closest battle buddy, remembered a different detail. He barely said a word all day. Aaron was always kind of reserved, but this was different. At dinner, he just stared at his tray, didn't finish his food, like his mind was somewhere else. Parker's words, recalled years later, carried a weight of guilt. That silent distance might have been the only warning sign. By lights out at 11 p.m., nothing outwardly alarming had happened. Soldiers squared away their uniforms, folded their blankets, and lay down in the long rows of bunks. Parker exchanged a few words with Aaron, something about the weather improving tomorrow. Aaron gave a small nod, almost a smile, then rolled into his blanket. It would be the last time anyone in his unit spoke to him. Hours later, the duty NCO came through the barracks with a flashlight, waking the next patrol shift. He swept the light over each bunk, pausing only when he reached Aaron's. The sheets were pulled back. The mattress was empty. At first, it seemed harmless. Maybe Aaron had gone to the latrine. But minutes passed and the latrine was empty. The hallways silent. His boots, cap, wallet, and even his cell phone sat untouched. That was the moment routine broke into alarm. Sergeant Ruiz was notified, then Lieutenant Mark Cho. A head count was ordered. The base stirred awake under the icy sky, radios crackling, soldiers rushing to checkpoints. One of their own had simply vanished, without gear, without a trace, and in temperatures where a man without boots could barely survive an hour. And yet, Private Aaron Young was nowhere to be found. The day before Aaron vanished had been like any other inside the frozen compound of Fort Wainwright. Reveille sounded at 0500 sharp, a bugle echoing across the snow-packed yard. Soldiers dragged themselves from bunks, some joking half asleep, others groaning at the cold that bit through every crack of the building. Aaron moved quietly, washing up at the sink, running his hands under water that steamed against the icy air. Breakfast in the chow hall was the same: scrambled eggs, dry toast, coffee that tasted like burnt motor oil. Most of the men filled the room with noise, stories, curses, jokes about sergeants. But Aaron sat in silence, staring at his plate. He chewed slowly, eyes fixed downward, as if his thoughts were heavier than the gear on his back. Specialist Josh Parker noticed. Years later, he would say, "He was there, but not really, like his mind was far away." I remember trying to crack a joke, and he just nodded. No smile. That wasn't him. The day rolled on with drills. Snow crunched under boots as the squad marched to the perimeter for guard duty. The north fence cut across a ridge of frozen ground, tall and topped with barbed wire. Sergeant Elena Ruiz walked her soldiers along the line, scanning for anything out of place. At first it was routine, just white silence, the occasional crow overhead. But then she stopped. There in a patch of half-frozen snow were tracks. Not clear, but not erased either. Too large to be from wildlife. Too shallow to be new. Ruiz bent down, brushed the crusted frost, and frowned. Could have been anyone, she muttered. Still, she couldn't shake the sense that someone had been where no one should have been. Later, when asked, she admitted, I thought about those prints for weeks after. I just didn't think they'd matter that night. Back at the barracks, Parker tried once more to draw Aaron out. The two men sat on their bunks after chow, the sound of laughter echoing from the rec room. Parker mentioned the coming weekend, maybe grabbing fast food off base if they could get passes. Aaron looked at him, opened his mouth as if to respond, and then closed it. He turned back to his locker, pulling his blanket tight. That's when I felt it, Parker remembered, like he'd already made up his mind about something. I just didn't know what. By evening, the base was settling into its usual rhythm. Soldiers shuffled back from duty, stamping snow from their boots, laughing about the bitter wind. The smell of chili drifted from the mess hall. On the surface, everything looked ordinary. But not Aaron. Through every meal, every drill, every small interaction, a shadow seemed to cling to him. He said less than ever. His eyes carried a far-off focus, as though he were listening to something no one else could hear. No one could have guessed that these small silences, the uneaten food, the blank stares, the unspoken words, were the final traces before he disappeared into the Alaskan night. By 11 p.m., lights out was called across the barracks. The long fluorescent tubes flickered, then clicked off, leaving only the dim red glow of exit signs. Soldiers climbed into their bunks, pulling wool blankets over themselves, the sound of zippers and coughs filling the room. Within minutes, the steady rhythm of snoring replaced the chatter. Aaron did what he always did, folded his uniform neatly at the foot of his bed, lined up his boots, placed his patrol cap beside them, and slipped under the blanket. Parker remembered exchanging just a few words before drifting off. He said something about the weather, like, tomorrow's going to clear up. Nothing dramatic, but he gave me this half smile. I thought maybe he was finally shaking off the gloom. I didn't know that was the last time I'd ever hear his voice. At 2:30 a.m., the duty NCO made his rounds. A flashlight beam swept across faces, pausing at each bunk, ticking off names against the clipboard. One by one, everything seemed in order, until the beam stopped. The mattress where Private Aaron Young should have been was empty. The NCO frowned. At first, it wasn't panic. Soldiers sometimes slipped out to the latrine. Maybe Aaron had gone to get water. The NCO gave it a few minutes. 5, then 10. But Aaron didn't return. He checked the latrine, empty. The hallways, silent. The common room, dark. Everywhere he looked, there was no sign of Aaron. What was more unsettling was what had been left behind. His boots, his patrol cap, his wallet, even his cell phone, plugged into the wall by his bunk, still charging. No soldier in Alaska's February cold would step outside without boots. No soldier about to desert would leave every personal belonging behind. The NCO's unease grew into alarm. He hurried to wake Sergeant Ruiz. She rushed in, her breath visible in the cold air, and scanned the bunk herself. Nothing out of place, except that Aaron was gone. By 3 a.m., Lieutenant Cho was notified. He ordered a head count. Dozens of soldiers shuffled into the freezing corridor in their long underwear, eyes bleary, teeth chattering. Each name was called, each soldier answered, except one, Private Aaron Young. "Lock it down," Cho commanded. Radios crackled to life. Guards at the front and rear gates were told to double-check logs. MPs were summoned. The barracks, once quiet and drowsy, now buzzed with frantic movement. Soldiers pulled on gear and spread out across the compound, checking the motor pool, the chow hall, the gym, even storage sheds. But there was no Aaron, no footprints in the snow outside his barracks, no trail leading to the perimeter. The only thing left was an empty bunk, a pair of untouched boots, and the chilling realization that a soldier had simply vanished into thin air. That night marked the end of routine and the beginning of a mystery that, to this day, has never been solved. By 3:15 a.m., Fort Wainwright was under an emergency lockdown. The order went out fast, no one in, no one out. Floodlights along the perimeter snapped on, throwing long shadows across the snowdrifts. The night that had begun in silence now throbbed with the sound of boots pounding pavement and radios hissing with clipped voices. Lieutenant Cho directed the first sweep. 300 meters. Every building. Every corner. Don't leave a closet unchecked. Soldiers bundled in parkas and headlamps fanned out across the compound, their breath puffing in clouds as they moved. They combed through the motor pool, checked the mess hall kitchen, even peered into the boiler room where heat pipes groaned and rattled. Nothing. Check the latrines again, Ruiz barked, her voice sharper than the wind. But the stall stood empty, doors swinging in the draft. At 3:30, the military police brought in K9 units. The dogs sniffed at Aaron's blanket, his pillow, then were led outside. At first, the trail seemed strong. The dogs pulled handlers toward the parade ground, noses low, tails stiff. Soldiers followed, tense and silent, their flashlights slicing through the darkness. The trail led north, past the barracks and toward the main gate. Everyone held their breath as the dogs advanced, their barks echoing in the icy air. But then, just feet from the guard station, the dogs slowed. They circled, confused, pawing at the snow. One handler shook his head. They've lost it. The scent's gone. The words rippled through the search party like a chill deeper than the Alaskan night. How could a scent just vanish? Guards at the gate swore no one had passed through. The logbook showed no entries. Nobody came by here, one of them insisted. We'd have seen him. Yet the K9s told another story. The trail had ended at that very gate, as if Aaron had been lifted from the earth or driven away in a vehicle no one recorded. Inside the command post, Cho rubbed his temples. The possibilities made no sense. A soldier walking barefoot into sub-zero temperatures would leave tracks and a body. A soldier deserting would take money. ID, at least a phone. None of those things were true. Instead, the only evidence pointed to an exit that no one admitted seeing. By 4 a.m., the entire compound was awake. Search parties pushed through snowbanks around the barracks, voices shouting Aaron's name into the wind. Soldiers climbed rooftops, checked crawl spaces, even scanned the frozen river that cut past the back of the base. The clock ticked toward dawn, and still nothing surfaced. From her home in Montana, Linda Young's phone began to ring. The Army liaison's voice was calm, rehearsed, but the words were shattering. Your son is missing. We're searching. As the first gray light of morning seeped over the Alaskan horizon, the facts remained unchanged. No footprints, no witnesses, no sign of Aaron Young, just a scent that ended at the gate and a mystery that was only beginning to unfold. By dawn, the first sweep of the compound was complete. Aaron was not in the motor pool, not in the gym, not in any shed or closet. Lieutenant Cho authorized the search radius to be pushed outward, 300 meters beyond the wire, into the snowfields and sparse pine woods that ringed Fort Wainwright. Soldiers moved in lines, headlamps cutting through the fog of their own breath, calling Aaron's name into the trees. At first, the only answer was the wind. But then, near an old cabin on the edge of the training range, a private shouted. Propped against the rotting wood of the doorway was a single Army boot. The squad surged forward, hearts pounding. Could it be Aaron's? The boot was lifted, studied in gloved hands. For a moment, it felt like the search was over. But when the size was checked, hope collapsed. It was far too small, cracked with age, the sole worn nearly through. Been here years, Sergeant Ruiz muttered, tossing it aside. False lead. Hours later, another report crackled over the radio. A soldier stationed near the ridge swore he'd seen a flicker of light in the darkness. A pinprick glow, like a lighter or flashlight, blinking between the trees. A team was dispatched, trudging uphill through knee-deep snow. They scoured the slope, their beams sweeping across branches heavy with frost. But no one was there. No prints, no ashes, nothing but the memory of a glow that might have been real or might have been exhaustion playing tricks. By mid-morning, civilians began to add their own voices. A woman who ran a small convenience store just outside the base told MPs she remembered a young soldier stopping in a few nights earlier. He looked nervous, she said. Bought a cup of coffee, barely spoke. His hand was shaking when he paid. Could it have been Aaron? The description fit. a lean young man in uniform. But the timing was vague, and the woman couldn't recall the exact date. Another tip came from a farmer who worked land near the Chena River. He claimed he saw a figure moving across the ice late at night, hunched, carrying something. Thought it was a hunter, maybe, he explained. But under questioning, the details blurred. Was it that night or a week before? Was the figure alone, or were there two? He wasn't sure. Each lead was logged, followed, and faded. The boot that wasn't Aaron's, the light that left no trace, the convenience store sighting with no date, the farmer's uncertain memory. Every clue raised hope, then collapsed under scrutiny, leaving soldiers colder and more tired than before. By noon, the sun was a pale glow, barely lifting above the horizon, and morale was cracking. Parker recalled the sinking weight in his gut. It felt like chasing shadows. Every time we thought we had something, it slipped away, and Aaron was still just gone. What no one knew then was that these early false trails would become the pattern of the case itself. Fragments, glimpses, half-truths. A maze of possibilities with no clear exit. By the second day, word of Aaron's disappearance had reached his hometown in Montana. The phone rang just after dawn, waking Linda Young from a restless sleep. The voice on the line was calm, official, rehearsed, but the words shattered her. Your son is missing. The Army is doing everything possible to find him. Linda dropped the receiver. In that moment, the small farmhouse kitchen seemed to tilt beneath her. Her son, who had never missed a day of chores growing up, who still called every Sunday night, was simply gone. Within hours, she was on the road north. Snow lashed against her windshield as she drove through the night toward Alaska, clinging to the thought that this was all some mistake. He'll be found, she whispered again and again. He has to be. Back at Fort Wainwright, the official search expanded. Soldiers scoured the frozen woods with snowshoes and thermal scopes. Helicopters swept low, their rotors chopping through the icy air, scanning the ground for any sign of movement. Still nothing. But beyond the wire, something else was stirring. Linda had always been active in her local church. When the news spread, the congregation gathered for an emergency prayer service. Dozens filled the wooden pews, heads bowed, candles flickering. The pastor's voice trembled as he said, "We pray for Aaron's safe return, and we pray for strength for his mother, who refuses to give up." In town, flyers began to appear, grainy photos of Aaron in uniform, taped to gas station pumps, pinned to bulletin boards at grocery stores. Linda, exhausted but relentless, started a Facebook page. Bring Aaron home. That quickly drew hundreds of shares. Messages poured in from strangers across the country. Veterans who wrote, "We won't forget your boy." Volunteers showed up at the base perimeter, locals with snowmobiles, hunters with knowledge of the terrain, even drone hobbyists offering their equipment. One man who ran a towing company brought a thermal camera he used for engine diagnostics. "If it helps find him, it's yours," he told Linda. At night, vigils were held. Families gathered outside the town hall, holding candles that sputtered in the winter wind. They sang hymns, their voices quivering in the cold air. Linda stood at the front, clutching a photo of Aaron against her chest. Her eyes were red, her cheeks raw from the wind, but she didn't waver. "He's my son," she told a local reporter, "and until someone proves otherwise, I will believe he is alive." For many in the community, Aaron's disappearance felt personal. He wasn't just a soldier stationed in Alaska. He was a son, a neighbor, a symbol of how fragile certainty could be. And as the Army's search pressed on with helicopters and K-9s, the people outside the gates waged their own search, armed not with radios and rifles, but with faith, flyers, and unshakable love. Yet as the days stretched into weeks, one chilling truth remained. No matter how many boots trudged through the snow, no matter how many prayers rose into the frozen night, Aaron Young was still missing. By the end of the first week, with no trace of Aaron beyond the vanished scent at the gate, the search began to shift into something colder, heavier, theory. Soldiers, investigators, even locals whispered possibilities late at night. Each theory carried weight, but none fit cleanly. The first was the simplest: accident or exposure. Perhaps Aaron had slipped out into the Alaskan night, confused, maybe even sleepwalking. The temperatures were brutal, dropping below -20. "No one survives long out there without boots," said Sergeant Ruiz. It made sense on paper, yet there were no footprints in the snow, no body found even after miles of search. "If he'd collapsed outside," Parker recalled, "we would have found him by morning. We looked everywhere." The second was darker, self-harm. Military life is demanding, Alaska even more so. Investigators quietly asked his bunkmates, had Aaron seemed depressed? Had he spoken about giving up? Every one of them, including Parker, pushed back. "That wasn't him," Parker insisted. "He might have been quiet, but he wasn't broken. He never gave me a reason to think he'd do something like that." His mother's words were even sharper. "My son was strong. He wouldn't choose that." Still, the theory lingered in files, a box that investigators were reluctant to close. The third theory was a bureaucrat's favorite, AWOL, absent without leave. Maybe Aaron had planned to desert, to vanish into the civilian world. But that too didn't fit. His wallet, his phone, his identification, all were left behind. Bank records showed no withdrawals. He hadn't contacted old friends, hadn't arranged rides or tickets. "If he planned this," Lieutenant Cho said grimly, "he left without anything to survive." And why would a soldier desert barefoot in the dead of night into snow that could kill him within an hour? The final theory was the most unsettling: abduction or outside involvement. The lost scent at the gate gave it fuel. Some soldiers speculated Aaron had been picked up by someone in a vehicle, a local trucker, a stranger, or worse, someone with clearance to drive through that gate without being questioned. "That's the part that eats at me," Ruiz admitted. "The dogs led us straight there, and then nothing, like he just disappeared into a car." CID investigators reviewed gate logs, interviewed guards. Everyone swore no vehicles passed during that window. Yet the possibility refused to die. Some soldiers whispered of Aaron leaving with someone he knew, maybe even someone in uniform. Others said it was impossible, too risky, too noticeable. But if not that, then what? None of the theories satisfied. Each opened new holes, new contradictions. An accident left no body. Self-harm left no signs. AWOL left no plan. Abduction left no witness. And through every conversation, every meeting, the same image returned. Boots by a bunk, untouched, in a room where a young man had simply ceased to exist. For Linda Young, the theories were salt in an open wound. Reporters asked her what she believed. She shook her head, clutching her son's photograph. "They can speculate all they want," she said. "But I know Aaron. He didn't just walk away. Someone knows what happened to my boy." And yet, as the weeks bled into months, the theories were all the family had. Shadows cast against the frozen walls of a mystery no one could solve. Weeks turned into months, and the blinding urgency of those first searches began to dull. The helicopters stopped circling. The K-9 teams were reassigned. By spring, only a skeleton crew of investigators remained, combing through tips that trickled in from beyond the base. Most were dead ends. A few, though, left lingering questions. One came from a motel 50 miles south of Fort Wainwright. The owner, a weary man with gray stubble, told investigators that a young soldier-looking kid had checked in the week after Aaron's disappearance. "Didn't talk much," the owner said. "Paid cash, left before sunrise, kept looking out the window like he was waiting for somebody." The description matched Aaron: thin, average height, brown hair. But the timing was off, and no security footage existed. The motel's cameras had frozen in the cold. "Could it have been him?" the owner asked, as if hoping the answer would solve his own doubts. Another clue surfaced in the summer thaw. A pair of hikers discovered a torn scrap of camouflage fabric lodged in the rocks of a steep ravine 15 miles northeast of the base. The Army collected it, compared it against standard-issue uniforms. Yes, it was the same type Aaron would have worn, but it was generic. No name tape, no blood, no way to prove it had belonged to him. "For all we know," one investigator admitted, "it could have been dropped years ago during training." Still, the image of a shredded uniform deep in a place few dared to tread haunted those who searched. Then there was the letter. A friend from Aaron's hometown in Montana came forward. saying he'd received a strange message just days before Aaron shipped out. He said he wanted to do something big in the Army, something that mattered. At the time, the friend thought it was just nerves, the way young men talked before deployment. But after the disappearance, the words felt heavier, almost like a warning. Something big, something that mattered. What had Aaron meant? For Parker, each new lead was a knife twisting deeper. He remembered long drives to strip malls and gas stations with CID agents, chasing rumors of a soldier sighted here, or a drifter there. Every time I thought, this is it, we'll find him. And every time, it wasn't him. Linda clung to each scrap of hope. She traveled to the motel, stood in the room where the soldier had slept, pressing her hand to the windowsill as if some trace of her son might remain. She wept over the torn uniform, whispering Aaron's name as though he could hear. She carried the letter from his friend folded in her purse, reading it again and again, searching for hidden meaning. But none of it added up. A motel stay without proof, a uniform fragment with no identity, a vague promise from a young man with his whole life ahead of him. They were pieces of a puzzle that refused to lock into place. And as autumn's first snow returned to Alaska, the unanswered questions multiplied. Had Aaron wandered far beyond where anyone expected? Had he left willingly, chasing some secret plan? Or had someone else guided those missing steps? Time had dulled the noise of the search, but the silence it left behind was far more haunting. Nearly 20 years passed. The Army had long since listed Private Aaron Young as Dust One, duty status, whereabouts unknown. His case file sat in storage, a stack of yellowing papers gathering dust. For most, the story had faded into the fog of unsolved mysteries. But for those who had served with him, and for his mother, the silence never lifted. It was at a memorial service in Montana when the first crack in that silence appeared. Former soldiers from Aaron's unit had gathered, sharing beers, swapping stories of bitter cold nights and old patrols. Among them was Corporal Dave Mitchell, who had worked in the mess hall back at Fort Wainwright. He'd aged, his hair receding, but his voice carried a weight that pulled the room quiet. "I saw something," he finally admitted, his words thick as though he'd carried them too long. That night, the night Aaron disappeared. The men around him leaned closer. Parker froze, his heart pounding. Mitchell explained that he'd been on late kitchen duty, cleaning pots, when he heard footsteps outside. Not the heavy march of a patrol, but softer, deliberate. Curious, he peered through the frosted window above the sink. "I swear it was Aaron," he said, "but he wasn't in uniform, just in undershirt and fatigues, and he wasn't alone." The room fell silent. "Who was with him?" someone demanded. Mitchell shook his head. Couldn't see clearly, too dark. But the other one, the way he moved, the build, it was an officer, or at least someone higher up. Not a private, not a kid. You can tell after long enough in the Army. The posture, the stride. Parker felt his chest tighten. For 2 decades, he'd carried the guilt of missing the signs, the torment of not knowing. And now here was a confession that changed everything. Aaron hadn't slipped away alone. He might have been escorted or taken. "Why didn't you say something back then?" Parker's voice was sharp, almost trembling. Mitchell lowered his eyes. "Fear. What if I was wrong? What if I'd ruin a career accusing the wrong man? And what if I wasn't wrong? What if speaking up made me the next to disappear?" His words hung heavy, the kind that draw more questions than answers. The revelation stirred both anger and sorrow. Had Aaron been coerced into leaving that night? Was he following orders he didn't understand? Or was he forced, powerless against someone with rank and authority? For Linda, the confession arrived later, passed to her through Parker. She clutched the phone as he explained, her voice breaking. All these years, I thought he might have been lost, confused, hurt. And now you're telling me someone may have let him out?" The possibility of betrayal from within, the idea that a man in uniform had walked her son out of the safety of the base, was almost too much to bear. But it also brought something else, a grim clarity. Maybe Aaron hadn't simply vanished into the snow. Maybe the Army had never told the full story. And once again, the mystery that time had buried roared back to life. When Dave Mitchell's confession surfaced, Investigators who had once closed the file were forced to look back at the case with new eyes. Suddenly the gaps, the parts everyone had ignored or explained away, looked like more than coincidence. The first hole was the K9 trail that stopped at the gate. At the time, handlers explained it as scent dispersal. Maybe the wind scattered Aaron's trace. Maybe snow had masked it. But with Mitchell's memory in play, another explanation seemed obvious. Aaron had entered a vehicle. A car or truck could have pulled just far enough inside the checkpoint to remain unnoticed, or worse, been waved through because the driver carried rank. If he left in a car, Parker said, that's why the dogs lost him. He didn't vanish. He was driven away. Then came the issue of the perimeter search. Soldiers remembered how certain zones were checked and rechecked, while others, deep ravines, abandoned outbuildings, were curiously skipped. Ruiz recalled protesting one exclusion, only to be told by a superior, "Don't waste time there." She admitted years later, "At the time, I thought it was odd, but we were soldiers. Orders were orders." If Mitchell was right and an officer had been involved, maybe those omissions weren't mistakes at all. Freedom of Information Act requests filed by journalists decades later uncovered heavily redacted documents. Pages of blacked-out lines concealed names, locations, and movements from the night Aaron disappeared. A retired CID investigator, speaking anonymously on a podcast, admitted, "There were things above our pay grade. Directives came down fast, telling us what to prioritize and what to leave alone. It wasn't normal." The podcast episode exploded online. True crime forums dissected every detail, posting maps of the base, satellite images of the gate, even weather reports from that night. Some Reddit users noted that a snowstorm hit just hours after Aaron vanished, meaning any tire tracks near the gate could have been erased within minutes. Others speculated that the gate guards might have been ordered to look the other way, their logs conveniently empty. And then there was the matter of the timeline. According to records, Aaron was last confirmed in his bunk around 11 p.m., yet Mitchell swore he saw him walking out near 1 a.m., a full 90 minutes before the duty NCO officially noticed his absence. If true, it meant the investigation began with the wrong clock, the wrong frame of reference. How many opportunities were lost because the Army believed Aaron had vanished later than he actually did? For Linda, these revelations were torture. She sat at her kitchen table with a laptop, scrolling through online threads where strangers debated her son's fate like a puzzle. Some claimed he had been groomed for intelligence work and disappeared into a covert assignment. Others argued he had been silenced because he knew something he shouldn't. "All I want is the truth," she told a reporter. "Not theories, the truth." But truth was slippery. The official story was full of blanks. The unofficial whispers pointed to cover-up, and in between sat the chilling reality. A 22-year-old soldier had walked out into the Alaskan night with someone he trusted or feared and never returned. Years passed, and the Army eventually closed the books. The file on Private Aaron Young was filed under Unsolved, whereabouts unknown. For the institution, it was a case gone cold. For his family, it was a wound that never closed. In his hometown in Montana, Linda Young built a small memorial in the front yard of her farmhouse, a flagpole with the stars and stripes, and beneath it a framed photo of Aaron in uniform, shielded in glass against the wind. On Memorial Day, neighbors left flowers there, even when Linda was too weak to stand outside herself. She also arranged for a headstone in the local cemetery, a cenotaph, an empty grave. It bore his name, his birth date, and the single word missing. Every Sunday, Linda laid fresh flowers at the stone, sometimes whispering prayers, sometimes just sitting in silence. "I needed a place to talk to him," she said, "even if he wasn't really there." For Parker, the guilt lingered like frostbite that never fully heals. He'd moved on with his life, married, children, a steady job, but he admitted he still woke some nights replaying Aaron's final smile. "If I'd asked one more question, maybe I'd know," he confessed. When he visited Alaska years later on a business trip, he drove past Fort Wainwright. The barracks had been remodeled, the base modernized, but he swore he could still feel the cold from that night seep through the glass of his car. Lieutenant Cho, now retired, carried his own burden. In interviews, he admitted the case haunted his career. I had one job, keep my men safe, and one vanished under my watch. He said he still dreamt of the moment the dog circled at the gate, the trail evaporating in the snow. Even online, Aaron's story refused to vanish. Reddit threads resurfaced every few years, users poring over scraps of declassified documents, debating theories in the language of modern true crime. Podcasters revisited the case, weaving together interviews with Parker, Ruiz, and even Mitchell, whose late confession became a flashpoint. Each episode ended the same way, with no answers. But for Linda, the real tragedy was not mystery. It was waiting. She lived each day in the hope of a phone call, a knock on the door, some small scrap of certainty. They can tell me he's alive, or they can tell me he's gone, she said once, voice breaking, but don't leave me here in the middle. By the time she passed, townsfolk remembered her as the mother who never stopped searching. At her funeral, the pastor spoke softly. She waited for him every day, and perhaps now, in God's care, she finally has her answer. Yet even in death, her vigil lived on. Locals still visit the cenotaph. Veterans still share Aaron's photo online. And Parker still tells his children about the quiet young man from Montana whose bunk went empty one frozen night in Alaska and never filled again. Because in America, some stories don't end. They echo. They haunt. They wait. Nearly 4 decades have passed since that February night in Alaska. Fort Wainwright has changed. New buildings, new soldiers, new wars to train for. But somewhere in the snow and silence of its history lies a void shaped like a young man from Montana who never came home. Private Aaron Young was not a general, not a war hero, not a name etched into textbooks. He was a son, a friend, a battle buddy, a 22-year-old who folded his uniform neatly at the end of the day, who carried dreams of healing others after his service, who left behind nothing more than boots by a bunk. And yet, his absence has left scars as deep as any battlefield wound. The lesson of his disappearance is not just about military procedure or frozen trails. It is about the cost of silence. The small details no one pressed harder on. The footprints Ruiz saw by the fence, the quiet nod Aaron gave Parker before lights out, the confession Mitchell carried for 20 years. Each was a thread that might have woven into an answer, if only someone had pulled sooner. It is also about the weight borne by those left behind. Linda Young's empty grave marker still stands in Montana, a reminder of a mother who never stopped searching. Her vigil tells us something about love, that it refuses to yield even when time, bureaucracy, and logic say to let go. For the Army, Aaron's case is a warning. When organizations close ranks too tightly, when early mistakes are buried, truth slips away. Transparency, vigilance, and compassion are not luxuries. They are necessities. A missing soldier is not just a statistic. He is a wound to every uniform. For the rest of us, his story is a mirror. How often do we overlook the quiet ones? The friend who says little, the co-worker who seems distracted, the family member who hides their worries behind a half smile. How many errands slip past us every day because we are too busy to ask a second question? Perhaps we will never know what truly happened on that frozen night. Perhaps Aaron was led away by someone he trusted. Perhaps he fell victim to forces beyond his control. Or perhaps he chose a path we still cannot see. But what is certain is this: forgetting him would be the final disappearance. And that is why stories like Aaron's must be told, retold, and remembered, not just as mysteries, but as reminders of the human cost when answers are left behind. If this story touched you, help keep Aaron's memory alive. Like this video, share it, and subscribe to Silent Traces. Together, we can make sure that names like his are not buried in cold files, but carried forward, as echoes, as lessons, and as proof that silence can never erase love.